Welcome, welcome, welcome. Episode 48 of Table Crashes this week. I'm Will Esgro. I'm joined this week with Doug Hettrick, and he is the designer of Kapow, the board game. Pretty interesting, beautiful superhero game we're going to be talking about tonight. And that is published by Ton Porcupine.
That's right.
And Doug, Ton Porcupine, tell me a little bit about
yeah, Ton Porcupine. Yeah, so that was it's me and my partner Carl Van Ostrin and Larry Bugaki. So all three of us are basically the design team of Ton Porcupine. Interesting name. We just kept on throwing out ideas until one stuck. We actually were thinking about 3 ton porcupine, because we were thinking a ton porcupine each is what we can handle. And then we decided, it's maybe too much to handle. So we've got 2/3 of a ton of a porcupine to handle now, and which seems about right when you're dealing with the games industry. It does feel like a porcupine every now and then.
So this is like typical in the mind of a designer / creator. The fact that you guys actually like went down and cultivated to the point where you were like, okay, listen, thematically it can't be 3 ton because that's just too much to too many ton.
Exactly. Exactly. It was just we couldn't handle that much tonnage of porcupine. That's exactly right.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So what brought you into the world of board game design, Doug?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm used to be a gamer way back, right? I mean, I'm talking original Dungeons and Dragons, some of the original Magic cards, which I don't have anymore, of course, so gave those away. Smart move there.
Kicking yourself in the pants for some of that, right?
Exactly. But really, it was actually my kids that brought me back into gaming. Okay. One day they were down in the basement and they saw some of my old games, and these were the old, bookshelf games. You remember Avon Hill bookshelf games?
I'll be honest. If you don't mind, I'd like to comment on that because many designers we've been speaking to in recent weeks always go back to the Avon Hill, Hill, and really because that was that 70s boom of board games.
Yep.
And that was like, again, we talk about the concept of modern board games today. Avon Hill was like the modern board games of the 70s, and it was gaming beyond Scrabble, gaming beyond Monopoly, and it really had this distinguishing factor of like if you weren't a real gamer in the 70s unless you had a shelf of Avon.
That's exactly right. It was Geek pride, right? It's best.
Absolutely.
Oh, but you just can imagine though, because I pulled these games out. I loved these games when I was a kid, right? Pulled them back out. The rule books were like stereo and installation instruction manuals. They were just huge and horrible. The rules were horrible. Like, I'm just like, how did we even play these games? They're all cardboard shits that were half unreadable. I mean, really, the quality was just horrendous, but it was the only game in town, right? So outside of Monopoly. So you played them. And that was actually sort of what got my juices flowing, which was, man, there's got to be a better way to make these games, right? There's got to be a better way to design these games. Some of my first ideas were just stealing some of those ideas and seeing how can we take some of the modern ideas in board gaming and put that in there and make them better. So.
And I think that's an interesting concept that you mentioned there, the stealing the concepts and applying them. Yeah. But I think, without that recycling, when you're borrowing the concepts of some of these games, the familiarity of some of those mechanics is required to bring people into the theme you're trying to portray. So there is a recycling. Sometimes there's, and the funny thing is that recycling sometimes leads to a nuanced look at how you can play with that mechanic, and then it becomes a new mechanic in itself.
You're absolutely right, and it's actually that nostalgia, right, that really puts you into the mood, which is, I remember this game was so great because of X, right? Then you go back and read the rules and it was nothing like that at all, right? But your memory just filtered out the good parts. So now you've got the good parts from that game and you're like, okay, how do I make that part that was good for the future, right? That's so some of that nostalgia is a good thing, right? Some of that forgetting about how horrendous they were to play. And, we used to spend 8 hours, on a game, 8-10 hours. I mean, you don't see that outside of, what is it? What's that huge game that I'm thinking of?
Twilight Imperium.
Right. Outside of Twilight Imperium, you don't see that anymore today.
That's very true, and it's almost like snubbed in a way with some of the modern culture. That hey, you distill this experience down for me within like a 2-hour package at most, or I'm not even looking your way, man.
Yeah. Well, when I was 12, I had 8 hours on a Saturday to play. I don't have that anymore. I got to clean up glue from my kids.
nice callback to our conversation before.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what's really funny too is I guess that's part of the plight of the modern board gamer compared to when we were kids with the Avon Hill stuff, is that we were kids with Avon Hill, and now a lot of people examining the market now aren't kids, they're adults and have a work-life balance, and that's why that 1 hour to 2 hour package is a requirement, because then they could fit 2 or 3 of those games in on a weeknight or weekend.
Yep. The kids, kids still have a whole bunch of homework to get done, right? They've got other things to get to, right?
That's right.
They've got glue to spread, right? So their time is really busy too. So
you're really killing me on this, Doug. You're bringing back memories of my son.
The story's going to come out.
His room. Yeah. My son gluing his room tonight. You're just like really killing me on that.
You gotta just grind it in a little bit more. It'll be better. but you're right. So the kids don't have time. We don't have time. But you still want to connect, right? Because otherwise, you're just all sitting in front of YouTube, right, all night long.
Very true. And again, I've mentioned this on previous shows, but the call back to the family, the call back to close personal friendships, I find is really what's driving a lot of the popularity of the modern movement in board gaming, because you have disenfranchised gamers moving to that space. You have, like you said, parents who are trying to. There it is on cue right there. My son trying to escape.
Yeah. You ran out of glue.
You have parents dealing with the screen time issue with kids, and we're trying to remove them and place them in a place where they could be creative outside of a tablet.
Right.
So I agree with 1,000%.
It's time to slow down as well, right? I mean, that's true. There's a lot of games that trust me, I'm a huge video gamer. I love video games. Played video games all my life as well. But they've become more twitchy than thinky, right?
Yeah.
Board games just exercise a completely different part of your brain, and you can still have fun doing it. You still be a superhero or supervillain.
Very true. Which I think, my prediction has been that we're going to see it sort of come around, because right now board games are borrowing from video games from the 90s and the 2000s. And I feel like the next evolution in board game design is moving from what you see as these one-off packaged games into these IP developed games that turn into almost like a melding of RPG systems into board games.
Funny.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. See, okay. We'll get into that. Trust me. I'll be asking you what's in the future. But it is. It's natural progression, and then I think what's going to happen is the board game industry will look at that and say, oh, we've moved so far away from that storytelling and the calculating the strategic games. They're going to start building those games out again, and there's going to be another wave of people moving from that to the new generation of video games. But I think
it's great. It's great.
Yeah, I do. Right. I agree. And I like that now, because there wasn't that the diametric setup where the board game world was influencing the video game world, and now that that's emerged, at least now there's a way to keep that in check, because there wasn't before. And I think that's why video game stuff ran so off the rails and became this really just business centric model, and not community centric model, right?
I think it's great. I think they're going to feed off each other for a very long time to come, right?
Yeah,
and it's interesting because they both have these challenges, right? You've got real time interaction going on in the video game. You've got a little bit more thinky process going on, and you only have cardboard, right? And you've only got pixels. So now you've got specialties that have to happen there. So, but each time that one or the other comes up with an idea, you say, okay, how can I make that in cardboard, right? And then of course they're looking at the cardboard and saying, how can I make that in pixels, right? That's great. It's great.
Yeah, you're right. It is becoming more parallel, and I think you see that too at the conventions, because before you didn't even see board games at like video game conventions, and now they have their own. But they have their own.
PAX is big, man. We were at PAX Unplugged last year, and we'll be there again next year. Excellent.
I love, like, I was there for the first Unplugged. I was there for this past year. I don't see myself not attending PAX in the near future or distant future. As long as PAX Unplugged is available, I will be attending.
Exactly.
So, what is your design process? Where do you start, and
that's a good question.
Where does it go?
I usually, go to sleep and wake up with a brilliant idea. No, I'm just kidding.
Boom. Magic. You're just blessed like that.
Sometimes that does happen. I will say it does happen.
Right.
No, I'm actually it's interesting because I think my design partners are different in terms of how they come up with games, but I'm one of the I'm a mechanic based designer, right? I think I figured that out about myself, which took a while. Which is, I look at something and I decide, okay, what's the mechanic that I can make that happen in the game with, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make that mechanic happen? What's going to be the fun part of that mechanic, right? And then I build on, okay, how do I bring in the theme? How do I bring in the rest of it? And how do I make those mechanics fit that theme? My partners are much more, theme down to mechanics, right? So we actually work really well together because, I'm going up and they're coming down and we meet in the middle somewhere.
Right.
And have an argument or two, and then a game comes out.
Right. And I think one of the nice things about you guys having that trade-off is that the person who thinks from mechanics first are usually the ones that are coming up with some innovative ways to, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I like this mechanic, but I want to change it, and then building from that, like, oh well, what does this mechanic feel like? Oh, then let's apply a theme. It feels like I'm doing this, and now I get to do this as my mechanic.
Yeah.
It's funny because, like, even something, I'll give an example, like a game where this would be goofy, but where you have to throw a dice in a certain way, and then you're like, oh, you keep throwing the dice like that, and you're like, oh, this feels like fishing,
right?
And now it's like, a fishing dice game. Okay, so we have to throw it this way, and so that from that side of it, that's where that builds. And then from the theme side, it's funny because you come into the same place in the middle, like you said, but these guys are like, hey, I really like fishing. What could I do in a game that makes it feel like I'm fishing?
Correct. And we both end up in the same solution, right? And which is perfect.
Right.
Great.
Right.
And the buildable dice in Kapow are a perfect example of that, right? Where Absolutely. It was, okay, how do we evolve, right? How does my superhero get better and bigger and more badder throughout the game? And it was like, okay, what's going to do that? I'm like, well, it's dice, right? We're doing dice. It's a dice game. I want a dice mechanic. Well, how do you do a dice mechanic that grows to the game?
Right.
Aren't very many of them, right? But then you find the one, right? And you're like, okay, that's the idea. We're going to do buildable dice.
Yeah. And but the funny thing is, and I'm sure we'll see it when we get to the table here, you borrow an idea from a game.
Yeah.
But then it evolves into your own.
Yep.
So why, and just so everybody knows, the theme around this game is a superhero theme. It borrows a lot from
and super villains. Either way, we don't judge.
That's true. That's true. Superhero, super villain. But I think at its core, a comic style game. Where like heavy theme and comic, and there's gonna be calls back if you guys were fans of like the old ages of comics.
Yeah, this is Silver Age comics at its best, right?
Right. So why this theme?
Why this theme? Yeah. So that's an interesting one, right? Because it came down to mechanically, right? What I was building was a dice-based game that was head-to-head combat, right? Okay. You can go a lot of different ways on that, right? Mm-hmm. And this game is, games, I don't know if everyone knows, right? But games take a long time to develop, right? From initial concept to, where we are today, where it's finally getting into the hands of our backers. It's been 4.5, 5 years, right? It's not a short stretch of time. It's a long stretch of time. And then back then, right, it was, comic books were just starting to hit their stride. And I'm like, I'm a big fan of Watchmen, right? And I was like, this makes sense, right? How can we do this in terms of, okay, it's a hero and a villain, and they're just going at one another, right? And then you're also, it's always about, pulling that trick move off where, they're coming at you, but you duck under it, and then you hit them back, right? And all that movement within the game happens, and it feels like an old style silver comic book era fist fight, right? even if you get into the cheesy, Batman days, right, where it's the Kapow and the Biff and the Bam, right? That's what it felt like. So it made perfect logical sense. We had tried other themes. I think someone even mentioned on Board Game Geek, we're like, this would be great if it was starships battling each other. And we're like, yeah, we thought about that. We thought about, big giant killer robots hitting each other, right? That was another game though. So, but you come down to it and like, what theme fits the mechanics the best way possible, and allowing us to actually put the fourth board, right, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to the rules, but to put in the hero and the villain board into the game and change who you're playing in the game made perfect another sense once we figured it all out. It makes perfect sense in hindsight, right? Getting there took a little bit.
Of course. And it's good that you brought that up, because what allows, like, when there's a pivot point during design, how do you normally handle it, especially if you're collaborating with a team? So when you hit a point where you're like, oh God, we're stuck. Like, what do you guys do? What are your steps in your process of like getting over that hump? What do you do?
So there's that's a good one, right? And we have 3 people involved in the design, right? So it's a 3-headed two-ton porcupine, right? It's difficult to manage at times, but we've always said, right, that the struggle leads to a better game in the end, right?
Very true.
And what we've done, right, and how we've set this up is there's a lead designer. So I'm the lead designer on this game, right? This is my original concept. Larry and Carl are the co-designers, right? There are other designs where they're leading, and I'm the co-designer on those games, right? And that really that structure is important, right? Because it says, okay, I've got a vision for what the game's going to be, right? And I'm going to take all the feedback and you're going to tell me the truth, right? Because you're part of this, right? Yeah. So you're not going to just sit there and say the game's great and walk away and tell me, later say, yeah, it wasn't that great, right? So you're going to tell me it's terrible, right? And I'm going to cry a little bit, but I'll get over it. But that process is the perfect part, which is you take the input from the people who are going to be totally honest to you, and then you go back and you refine it, right? You sleep on it and you come up with a better idea. But ultimately, we've decided, right, when it comes down to a point, you're the lead designer. It's your choice, right? And sometimes it's right. Sometimes we're arguing about something and like, what, it didn't matter. Or we'll get 4 weeks down the road and after some play testing, be like, no, you were right. We'll flip it back.
I'd like to highlight what you're saying here too, because I think it's vastly important for anybody who's entering design. They're already in design. The concept you're putting forth, and actually how to run an effective team within a design team. Because yes, collaboration is very important, but assigning that, we'll call it hierarchy for this, but assigning where the lead designer on a project has final say. And a great example of this is even in playtesting sessions, and I've done this in the past. You set rules where you just tell me what you don't like. Tell me what's frustrating you about my game, and let me fix it. Like, you can give me 1,000 things ways to fix this, but you're going to sort of waste both of our time in this process because it's ultimately going to be my decision. And I love that you guys have structured that.
And I'll tell you, there's thousands of times where you're sitting there and you need to take that feedback in, and your initial reaction to designer is always to say, no, you're wrong. I designed it. I'm a perfect designer. I know what I was doing.
Wrong. You're playing it
wrong. It's your fault, right? Right. And so you got to take it. You got to go back. You sleep on it. You think about it in your brain, and you go, oh, they were right. You get down the right path. So,
it's funny.
We're okay being stubborn with each other every now and then, and realizing you just need some time to think about it. You'll come back around. It'll be fine.
Right. And what's really interesting about that is like you said, you get these situations where you're very defensive about that product, and so many. It's funny because there's so many different levels. Language is important during testing and during creation, and like when you guys are doing collaborations, because somebody could say something that didn't really mean, and it could come off the wrong way, and then it changes the whole session for testing.
And we've had that, but the point is, you got to realize we're always chasing the fun, right? That's what we've always come back to, is right. I'm saying this about the game, not you as a person, right? I'm saying this about the game, and it's because I didn't have fun when this happened, right?
Right.
And that's when you put it in the right words and the right terms, then it's a little bit easier to digest. No one wants to hear that their game stinks, right?
No, but I mean, the funny thing is you have to, and one way I found that I'm able to remove myself from the pride of it is I never. Sometimes when I'm designing, the pride sets in when I'm like, okay, this is my game. But you have to, it's not your game. It's the player's game.
Right.
You know what I mean? And if you keep that in your mind throughout that process, then it helps you transition through those like feedback where it's not doesn't feel like it's great, right?
Well, and this hindsight is always 20/20, right? I look at something. I mean, I'm looking at the Geek Spiel table right now, right? Looking at some of these things, and I'm like, I didn't design that, and I hated it when we first put it on the board, right? And now I'm like, this game doesn't work without that, right?
Yeah.
And it's because again, that iterative process and making sure that you get honest people who are going to give you honest feedback, right?
Yeah,
it's tough.
Very important.
You got to take it.
Right. It would be worse if they'd said nothing or they sugarcoated it, and then it goes to market and everybody says all the things that they were thinking.
Yeah.
and I think that,
after the fact.
After the fact. And then they're like, yeah, I was thinking that too, man. Well, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah. Well, and this is and I'll put a plug out there for anybody who ever play tests a game, right?
Yeah.
Don't just leave the table and tell the person, yeah, it was good, and walk away.
Oh yes, absolutely.
That doesn't help. I mean, it sort of helps our pride a little bit, and we'll take it, right? Because you said it was good, but it doesn't help, right? It really doesn't help. It doesn't make a better game. It doesn't help us design a better game, and it doesn't help us move the industry forward, right? Tell them and even if you don't want to tell them what was wrong, at least tell them what you liked, right? Because if you tell us what you liked, we'll put more of that into the game, right, in the future, and some of that bad stuff will go away by itself.
You hope.
Yeah. Well, it's horrible.
So what drives your passion to create? I mean, you said your kids were like the renewed passion, but what personally drives you to create the products you're creating?
I tell you what, at this stage, I have so many ideas bubbling around in my head for games. Mm-hmm. I'm excited. I want them to exist in the world so I can play them. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's that part. It's literally just I want to get these out and onto the table.
Well, that's a good problem to have, I think.
It's a good problem to have, and it's always fun because we've said this time and time again between Larry and Carl and I, which is game is always perfect from the first time you think about it, right? You think about a game in your brain and you're like, this is going to be this and it's going to do that and it's going to be great. And then you get some paper out and you put some numbers on some cards and then you throw some dice and you're like, this thing is terrible. What happened to my beautiful idea that I had, a couple of days ago? So
absolutely. No, that's very true. And again, speaking back to the process of design, it's very common that in the like your initial idea, the fantasy you have about it, because you're thinking of the results of that of that experience, but you're not thinking of the process of playing through the game. And I think this is actually part of that design evolution. Many times we over design games. Yeah. And it becomes, because here's the convenience that video games has over board games. A computer does all the calculations, and you just watch the things light up and move the way they're supposed to. Board gaming, the players are the CPU and the RAM and everything else that has to do those calculations. So if you complicate a mechanic, yes, it might give that feeling of crunch, because we hear that all the time, crunchy games. But often that the crunch gets out of control in early designs. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. You have to add 4 numbers in this game, right? Most of the time, right? And then subtract 2 of them, and we're like, is that too much? Right? Because we want a fun, light, superhero versus supervillain battle, right? We don't want people sitting here with a spreadsheet figuring out if they lost health or gained health, right? So yeah, absolutely. You look at it and you go, oh man, what? And again, it's that chasing that fun, right? What was fun and what was boring statistics that I had to, am I playing a spreadsheet? If I'm playing a spreadsheet, this isn't a game anymore, right? I might as well still be at work, my day job.
Sure. But I find endlessly interesting is that there are players that seek out that experience, though.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And that's fine. Like this is what I love about this industry. I love it all. Right. I really do. People are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I would never play Cards Against Humanity. I would never play what's that? Exploding Cats." And I'm like, "That's
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
That's your thing. Do it." Right?
Yeah.
We're all
I
trying to
agree.
have fun with some other human beings in this world. That's good. Do it.
That
Whatever makes you happy.
I like the tagline that you mentioned and you keep mentioning, chase the fun.
Chase the fun. Yeah, absolutely.
And that I think it does encompass the design, the proper design theory, in my opinion.
Right. Yep.
Um,
and it's, I tell you, that is, you have to realize that may take you away from your initial idea, right?
yes. Yep.
Like this game does not look like it started, right? And it's because
Right.
we chased the fun, and some design ideas that we had at the beginning, and we're like, they're definitely going to be in the game, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do that. We got rid of them, right? And it's hard because you're cutting off what you thought was an arm of the game. But if it's not a fun piece of the game, cut it out. And you got to be vicious. And then in the end, you're like, okay, yeah, that was worth it. But it feels really hard cutting that piece out when you're on it, right? It's like, no, this is what my game was supposed to do. Yeah, but if you have something else that's fun,
right,
keep going. Make that thing more fun, right? Keep going down that fun line. And then later, I always take those things and I say, okay, we cut it out of this game. Right. I'm going to throw it over here in the spreadsheet. Another game someday is going to need it. I'm going to pull it back out and sew that arm back on another Frankenstein.
Yeah, and I was going to actually ask you, were there times where you removed something from a game and then brought it back in later development time?
Absolutely, and it was actually interesting because some of the highbrow concepts we had for this game on the main board actually ended up in some of the heroes and the villains, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. And that is another kind of process we went through, especially with Kapow, which is how do you introduce the game and then how do you expand the game, right? Because, within 5 minutes, and hopefully I'll be able to do this in a little bit, right? Which is explain the game in 5 minutes, right? But that's not the full game, right? I'm giving you the intro, right? And then going on from there, okay, adding these heroes and villains and adding all their special powers.
Yeah, so you throw in the basic mechanics, and once people are able to take off the training pants, you put them into you're like, oh, by the way, here's leader abilities, or here's this asymmetric approach now that you deal with that.
And people have to remember, you have to take this game out into the public sooner or later, right? And you have to take it to a con, you have to take it to a show, right? You have to take it to PAX Unplugged that we were talking about, and you have to sit down at a table, right? And you have to get 3 to 5 strangers, right, playing your game as quickly as possible because their time's important, your time's important, right?
Absolutely.
So you want to sit them down. You want to be able to explain the rules, and you want them to play test that core stuff that's going on, right? Then you can always add icing on later, right?
Exactly. No, you're right. So we already touched on mechanics and theme and which one you lean on. And I love that you have a collaborative team effort.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that you have 2 people that approach from the theme and then one you approaching from mechanics.
It's not that they don't know mechanics.
No, I'm not saying that. But like that design wise, they're coming from theme. And I guess so. You mentioned that you guys sort of pass the torch on aspects of like who takes lead.
Yep.
What usually, how does that start? How does the conversation start when somebody has an idea?
Yeah, it's usually with great enthusiasm, right? Because again,
the game is
perfect. The game is perfect in your mind, right? I got this great idea, right? And
and the funny thing is, everybody leaves that initial meeting just as excited as the person because the passion they brought to the table.
Absolutely.
And then like the week later, everybody's just groaning because they're like, "Oh, I didn't know it was going to be this. It's difficult to make that happen."
We're getting better at that because when someone comes to the table with a brilliant idea, right? It's and they're always a brilliant idea. It's we try to poke the holes in it, right? We don't try to deflate the balloon, right? But we try to say, okay, here's what you got to think about, right? Are you going to be able to do this? Are you going to run out of cards? Are you going to be able to put more cards in, right? How many cards are you going to need, right? You're talking about a 6-player game of cards, right? You're going to need 200 cards, right? So, just, starting to get your mind thinking about, okay, what are the pieces and parts I'm going to need to pull this off? So not deflating the idea, but honing in on, okay, what are you going to do, right? How is it going to work? How many of this are you going to do, right? Actually, we're talking about a card game right now that it's got some draw. It's got some cards that allow you to draw more cards, and it's like, okay, so that's good. You're going to need that, but how many, right? How many of those are you going to need? What's the percentage, right? Have you thought through that? And so then it comes down to, okay, all right, I'm going to build a spreadsheet of the cards that are going to be in the game, and here's how many are going to do this, how many are going to do that, how many are going to do that, and then I can start analyzing the percentages and start seeing, do I feel that's right? You'll never know just from looking at a spreadsheet, because what's going to have to happen next is you're going to have to prototype it all and then put it on the table and start playing.
Right.
And then you'll instantly know. You're like, oh, no, that was way too many or too few or whatever.
And interesting, I actually have so
questions, more questions.
Yeah, with that, is there a purpose to diving into deep math, deep analysis when you're putting together changes to a game, or is the best test or the best results through testing? Because how many times have you spoken, or how many times have you done this personally, where you're like, okay, if I apply trigonometry to this problem in this game, then this will fix my issue, and then 90% of the time you take it to the table and it didn't even do it, but then you're able to work through it through like play tests, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I always try to do the math first, right? And you're correct. It never works right. I've gotten better at this, right? Initially, we all think the math is going to tell me, right? Oh, it's 25% of the cards are going to do this, therefore you'll get 1 out of 4. Everyone will do that. It'll be easy, right? You'll know it, right? And then the first game you play, not one of those cards come up, and you're like, how could that be?
Right? It's statistically impossible.
But it did, right? Because that's how the game play, right? So that's perfect, right? Which is okay. I do the math, right, to get myself into the ballpark, right? All I want to do is get in the ballpark, right? Because I do have to prototype this stuff, right? So at least gives me an idea of what I need to create. And then, of course, you get through that first play test and you take, 5 of those cards and you throw them away, or you add in a whole bunch more, right? Whatever it is, right?
And it is legit, even though you went through all that prep work. Like 100% I sympathize with what you're saying here, because you do go through all that math and you crunch it down. You spend like hours sometimes on calculating it out, and then right after that play test, it doesn't take the same amount of time. You're just like, yep, okay, these cards are out.
No, that was a bad idea. Boom, gone. And it's funny because nothing compares to play testing. And then you get first play testing with your groups of friends, or your torture your family, or whatever it's going to be, right? And then okay, that's the second round, right? Then you get out there with friends of friends, right? And then you get out to the general public, right? And and that's a scary proposition when you get out there, right?
It is.
Some people aren't afraid of just saying, "No, this game sucks," right? You're like, "Oh," you just walk back to the hotel all deflated. So
I'm going to pause for 1 second because I am seeing some things in chat. Matt, I saw that there's a question in chat. What was that question?
Oh yeah.
So the question was that they're wondering if Doug is going to the tournament. What was that, this Saturday in Connecticut?
Yeah, it's at the boardroom, I believe. The boardroom this Saturday. We're doing teach. We're going to teach Kapow first, and then there'll be a tournament right afterwards.
Oh, awesome.
Yep. So that boardroom in Connecticut's run by a good friend of ours, Tenzin, which coincidentally enough is one of the first places that Larry, Carl, and I all met, and we actually signed our LLC papers there one night. So good times, good memories of that place.
That is awesome. So here we're getting into some of the fun questions, and I asked this of all the designers we have on. Where do you see this business heading in the near future?
That's an interesting question, right? Had you asked me a year ago, I would just said this thing's going to keep skyrocketing, right?
Right.
And I think there are signs that it's not going to skyrocket forever, right?
Right.
Right. I have a feeling that there will be a bit of a collapse. Yeah. But I still feel like we haven't seen the end of the growth, right?
Absolutely.
So my feeling right now is we may see, there's just too many games coming out right now, and quite honestly, there's just too many middling games coming out right now, right? They're they're being mass produced and they're not up to the quality they should be, right?
I agree.
Now, of course, my game's perfect. All right, just a caveat. But there are just a lot of games coming out right now, and the growth in the market's been huge, and for a while we've been able to sustain that growth in games because the player base has just been increasing so much. But I think we're just going to see kind of a top out here for a little bit. But I still think there's a massive amount of growth in the industry. I think there are more people playing games every single day. I think there are more people. I mean, I know I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "You design board games like Monopoly?" And I go, that's the answer. You go, yeah, but better, right? And let me show you, right? And let me show you how, and let me show you why, right? And you wouldn't stand next to a microwave that was built in 1970. Why are you playing a game from then, right? I've designed a game, this decade, this millennium, so that's going to be a lot better for whatever you want to play.
Hey, don't tell the fans of those moldy oldies, man. They'll come at you.
Don't get me wrong. I still have some 80s music stashed on CDs somewhere. I gotcha.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. What do you see the problem? Do you think that it's a multi-pronged problem coming from the higher and the lower ends in terms of like the too many indies sort of flooding in the market at the same time, and also too many mundane games being sort of like put through the mill just to get titles out from the bigger guys?
Yeah, it's right. Everybody wants a piece of this growing market, right? When you have a market growing so quickly, right? Everyone wants in and everyone wants a piece of it. So I think you're pressured into putting more out. And I think it's the first time, I would say in the past 5 years, that we've seen people go full-time, right? Full-time designers, full-time publishers, right? So people are making a living at this right now. And that wasn't the case, 10 years ago. No, everyone had a secondary job, right? Or first job, right? And this was always the sideline, or, on weekends, I'm going to go to cons and do this. Now people are actually making a living doing this, right? So there's a kind of a pressure, right? If you have a salary or multiple salaries that you need to pay, you need to keep cranking out games, right? So I think that puts a lot of pressure on the market. I think, and as much as I love it, the Kickstarter has put a lot of pressure onto the market, right? It's lowered that barrier of entry, which is great. Trust me, I used it, right? Kapow's a perfect example, right? It allowed me to publish a game that I don't think would have been published by other folks, right? Because of the buildable dice and some of the things that we did. But yeah, so it lowers that barrier of entry, allows people to do it, but that means it allows people doing a Trump political game to also get out there and try to do it too. I don't know how many times I've seen that pop on Kickstarter. I'm just like, stop it already, stop. It's like not going to fund.
Right, it's like once a month. Now the first one, like the first 2 or 3 funded because it was funny and it was a joke. And they were selling to the hipsters. But I mean, there's only so many hipsters you can sell to, guys. The real board gamers aren't going to buy that.
No. But it'll top out for a little bit. But there's still so many people coming into the industry. I think there's so many people who are realizing, I think, again, video games and the casual games on the phones have brought people into playing games, right? And now I can play people face to face on a Friday night and have a glass of wine or a glass of beer, right? And have some fun. I mean, that's great, right? That's all FaceTime, right? And I think people are looking for that because the more we get into our phones, the more we realize human interactions, not that bad.
No, it's good and needed.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
I don't know.
You ready for a fun?
You can ask my kids, and I think they'll disagree with you. But
yeah, right. So here come the really fun questions. You ready for this?
Yeah.
What is your guilty pleasure game?
My guilty pleasure game. So let's see. Guilty pleasure game. It's funny. I tell you, we played. My kids and we've played Bang, that dice game, a million times. It is. I do one of those online stat things, right, where I keep track of the games I've played, and that is the game I've played by far, more than anything else. And you want to talk about a luck-driven, pretty random game where politics are the entire game. Don't kill your dad. Right? And then of course the answer is you killed me first last time, and okay, well, can't argue with that. But right. It's bang. I've tried to wean the family off of most of those.
I've tried to steer them away.
Try to steer them away.
And I guess and the reason it's a guilty pleasure for you is because the ridiculous amount of randomness in the game that normally you'd be like you'd be ashamed that there's that much randomness.
There's that much randomness. No, it is a heavy dice game, and we're going to talk about Kapow being a heavy dice game in a second.
Exactly.
I can talk out of both sides of my mouth. It's okay. It's easy enough to do.
What is your favorite mechanic?
What my favorite mechanic is dice. Actually, I do like dice a lot.
Okay.
But I like dice that have mitigation, right? And dice that are controllable, right? So to me, right, anytime you see in a game that you roll one dice, that's just a lazy game designer, right? That is like, I will take any random number between 1 and 6. If your game has that much slop in it, that's horrible, right?
Yeah.
To me, if you're rolling 2 dice or 3 dice, now you've got a nice little bell curve in there, right? You've got, the known and then the outliers, right? Yeah. That's when you're starting to get into real game design, right?
Right. And it's funny you said that because like you said, you get into bell-shaped curves and, it's like, here, let me show you a probability table here. So that you realize that, like with a single dice,
there is no probability.
There is no probability. It's completely random, and you're going to hate yourself for playing this game.
Yeah.
What I can reference like recently is that Choose Your Own Adventure book game.
Yep.
It uses a single D6 for RPG mechanics, and if you roll a 1 at any point in that game, if you have a piece of equipment that you've acquired, it's a crit miss.
Yeah,
and you lose that equipment.
Sure.
A 1 on a D6. It's like, what were you thinking?
So 1/6 of the time randomly, or every time I roll the die, because I'm good at rolling ones in games. So yeah, perfect.
Yeah, same here. Yep. What advice do you have for brand new designers or other designers that are currently that are parallel to you in the industry right now? What would you be your one piece of advice to both of those categories?
Yeah. So for new guys, right? I think you have to realize you're in for the long haul, right? If you want to designing a game for you or your family, that's easy enough, right? But making a real product is a long haul, right? And you need to be committed to it, right? And if you have a game that is fun, I urge you to do it, right? We need more fun games out there in the world. We need more good games out there in the world. But you got to realize it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of play testing, a lot of shoes on the ground at cons, doing a lot of things. This one for Kickstarter, we had to deal with China, right? So we had to do, specific manufacturing in China, and then international shipping and then shipping to your backers. So, it's a process. It's a long process, but you shouldn't give up on it, right? I mean, I look back in the last year and a half since we launched the Kickstarter, I'm like, oh my God, right? Well, it's been a year now, but I'm like, oh my God, that was a lot of work. And had I known it all going in, I maybe would have made different decisions, but it was worth it, right? It was worth it to get to this point. And so you got to stick with it. That's the only thing I would say to the new designers, and just realize it's going to take a while, and you can do it though. It's doable. It's totally doable.
It is, yeah.
And other people in my shoes, kind of in the industry, is that the second part of the question?
Yeah. So people that were really kind of at the same level or already established in the industry, what piece of advice would you give them?
Geez, I don't know. I'm looking for advice from them. Can't tell you. I think my advice, I will tell you that my put right now and my advice right now to all of us is to build a community, right, with one another, right. I'm never going to compete against Fantasy Flight in this world, right, just by myself. But I think we can pull together a community of folks and a community of independent game developers, that can do really, really good things and push the industry in really fun ways. Fantasy Flight, I don't want to pick on Fantasy Flight, but any large game manufacturer, right? They have to pay salaries, right? They have to pay artists, right? They have to crank things out. So they're going to take the safer bet, 9 times out of 10, right?
That's right.
we as independent developers have the opportunity to stretch the boundaries unlike anyone else, and we should, and we should support each other when we do that.
They reap the rewards of your design.
Oh, then they will, But you know what? But they're building the industry too, so
that's very true. No, you're right.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
You're right. Then what's next for you? I mean, we're gonna sit down. We're gonna talk about Kapow, but what's next for you guys over at Ton Porcupine?
I don't know.
Wait, what? Oh, hold on.
There's a little game called Perch we're working on. That's a great one. That's a fun little game where you will no longer be friends with your friends after you're done with it. There's another one we're working on. That's called This Is Only a Test. That's a pre-apocalypse game. Where the world will either end with a nuclear bomb, the Russians invading, or only a test, right? So that one hits the 1950s like right on the nose, if you will.
Yeah, of course, of course. So you have a few projects going there.
Yeah, and those are two other ones I'm the lead on. Carl's got one coming out from I don't know if it's been announced. I think it has Final Frontier. He's got one called Town Square coming out from Final Frontier, which is really, really nice. And again, this is sort of like that, the big company, independent developer working together, right? Again, like you said, you come up with an idea, they take it, but if they can take it and market it and go with it, hey, we're all for it.
Yeah.
And Larry's got an interesting one coming up where you actually get to craft monsters and take them up against one another. And that one's actually very interesting, like a territory control, but you're going to build your monsters up against one another, which is excellent. It's called Monstercraft. So
is it in game balance where like you build them throughout the game to sort of counter each other's abilities, like as they grow? Oh, that's cool.
That's exactly right. So they actually have it. There's brute force, poison, and magic, right? Yeah. And you can have brute force, magic, and the other one, attack and defense, right? So if you see somebody building something with someone else, right, you're going to build that counter creature against them, right? Which is awesome.
You got the dueling triangles there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bit of a rock paper scissors kind of build, but of course your monsters almost instantly die in that game, which is great. So you're constantly building them and sending them out against you're targeting and you're sending out missiles essentially against one another.
Yep. So, any plugs, conventions? Well, actually, we'll start with plugs. Any plugs or
plugs?
Or that you want to hand out?
No, thanks for the commentator reminding me about the boardroom coming up this weekend, which is great. We'll be at Connecticut ConCon coming up. We'll be at Unpub 9, and then we'll be on PAX. We'll be at PAX Unplugged as well. And we actually, let me try to think of what else. And look for Carl's game coming out from Final Frontier. I know that's going to be excellent when it comes out. Did a lot of play testing with that one, and in that game you actually get to play a shopkeeper who sells to the heroes, right? So you're the NPC in the game. It's an asymmetrical game, so everyone plays a different shopkeeper, like a blacksmith and barkeep and a magician seller, right? And so you actually get to play kind of that NPC while the heroes walk around the town and you try to sell them your goods.
Awesome.
Yeah. Those are the major cons, I think.
So there's major and
Dreamation down in New Jersey. That's the one I'm forgetting.
Okay. Yep. Dreamation, right?
Dreamation, yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. Cool. So if you don't mind, you ready to crash the table? And you're gonna
I am good to go.
All right.